Pickleball Diaries presents Cling on the Court with your host, Lily Brown. Let's go!
Hi everyone, welcome to Cling on the Court, cracking the pickleball code. And today with us is our performance coach, Coach Jeff. Thank you, Coach Jeff, coming with us. And do you want to tell everyone what topic we want to talk about today?
Yeah, today we're going to talk about the muscle science of pickleball on a stroke-by-stroke basis. So just take a look at what's happening to the body and what's happening biomechanically during various shots in pickleball and why it matters to know some of these things.
Oh yeah, definitely. I know why it matters. It's literally how I started playing and a little bit background of myself. And I'm coming from no sports background and pick up the paddle. First 6 months, I injured every possible muscle it could be. So I am so familiar with injuries, pickleball injuries. And that's how I started. I was my coach and learning literally stroke by stroke. And every time I'm learning a new stroke, I was like, wow, I never knew I have these muscles ever existed in my body.
Yeah.
So I'm very excited to share this topic. So Jeff, let's start. So first, do you want to talk about why do you think muscle mechanics matters? Why?
Well, for a few reasons. So having good technique or good biomechanics on your shots, it's important because if you have good biomechanics or good technique, it'll allow you to execute the shot you want to execute with effectiveness or consistency and effectiveness, but also to do it in a safe way. So if you're like most of us, you're probably playing a lot of pickleball. Most people who play pickleball, and if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably playing a fair amount, 3 to 5 times a week, possibly 2 hours per session. So we're on the court for a long time, and it's important that if we're going to play, there's some things we want to make sure we have in place to avoid injury. So that's part of it. Part of it is about being effective with our shots. And another part of it is being safe when we're out on the pickleball court so that we can avoid injury or minimize the risk of injury. And if we have a better understanding of how the body's working and how the body should work, it might help us avoid injury, especially if we're playing a lot of pickleball.
Yeah, exactly. I think everyone can look around our pickleball friends, and it's hard to find somebody not carrying some kind of injury or pain. And especially nowadays, I think people take it as the fact, oh, I play pickleball. Of course, I will have some kind of injury, which is not, I don't think it's right for long-term fun, right?
Well, yeah, and it's, there are people it's an often talked about topic. We hear that a lot of doctors and physiotherapists are talking about since pickleball started exploding in popularity, there's a lot more patients that are coming in with specific types of injuries related to pickleball. So anyways, that sort of relates to today's topic because I myself have gotten injured a number of times when I first started playing, mostly through calf strains because my body wasn't used to the demands of the sport yet. So anyways, yeah, it's important, what we're going to talk about today mostly is sort of biomechanical topic or biomechanical things, but it's also important, like things like warming up really well and preparing your body to train or play are super critical. But yeah, you look around and you see people wearing elbow braces, knee braces, everyone's experiencing different things in their body. So it's important to do some things, to put some certain things in place so that you can try to minimize the risk of injury.
Yeah. Okay, so let's dive in. Let's talk about the first stroke, the drives, and the ground stroke.
Yeah, we're going to take a look at drives and ground strokes, and it's important when we're talking about biomechanics and how the body works, which is another way of saying sort of technique. Or biomechanics are an element of technique when we're talking about strokes or ground strokes. But it's always important to note that like technique is always just a function of a tactic. So when we're talking about how we're going to do something in terms of the technical elements, we have to be really clear about what we're trying to do in terms of the ball that we're sending. So our technique will change. It could change dramatically depending on what we're trying to do with the ball. But that being said, even though our technique might be different from shot to shot, there are some common fundamentals that we want to have in place and also some principles that are really important. So if we look at, say, a ground stroke, so let's say it's a third shot drive. So basically, we're trying to drive the ball by increasing the speed and keeping it low over the net to try and make life tough for the other team at the non-volley zone. Generally speaking, we want to have good balance, right? We want to be balanced and in position to hit the shot before it's time to hit the shot. And usually when we're hitting ground strokes, we want to have what we call ground up biomechanics. So there's this thing in biomechanics, we call it the coordination chain. So we sort of start from the ground up with the ground stroke, where we push into the ground to help either drive our body forward or to rotate our hips, to help drive our upper body and then bring our arm and paddle through at the end to make contact with the ball. We call that having ground up biomechanics or a ground up coordination chain. So we sort of push into the ground to drive our hips drive our torso drives our shoulders, and our shoulders bring the arm and paddle to the ball. So in an ideal world, that's sort of how we hit most of our ground strokes if we're doing it well. And through that shot, we're using a whole bunch of different muscles. So, we're using our glutes a lot because we're usually in an athletic stance. So we're having to push into the ground. So our glutes are firing, our hamstrings and quads are working in different ways to push our body either forward or to help twist our hips. Our calves are engaged quite a bit because as we drive into the ground, we usually raise up a little bit. So our calves are firing. And then our core, so our abdominal muscles are also heavily involved if we're talking about angular momentum or rotational forces. So you can see that on a ground stroke, all these muscles are being used, and it's really important to use them in the right sequence. And then the other thing that's really important if we want to maintain good ground up coordination is we have to have really good reception skills, which we've talked a lot about in a previous episode. And when we talk about reception skills, we're talking about the ability to have our body and paddle prepared in sort of an optimal position, and to be there on time, which usually if we're talking about a ground stroke is before the ball bounces. So if we want to have great coordination from the ground up and use our body in the right sequence or our body parts in the right sequence, we have to have great preparation and setup to the ball, or else that all becomes very challenging and we become inefficient, which we don't want.
Exactly. So it's interesting, like ground stroke, I think a lot of pickleball players think ground stroke is a term from tennis. And ground stroke seems a new concept for a lot of new players coming to the pickleball, or even the players who doesn't have the tennis background. So can you explain a bit more of what ground strokes means to pickleball, and when players can use these kind of ground stroke form in pickleball?
Yeah, for sure. So by definition, for anyone out there that doesn't know, a ground stroke generally means, or by definition means, that the ball has bounced on the ground before you hit it or before you stroke the ball. So a ground stroke just means the ball has bounced. Generally, though, when we're talking about a ground stroke, we're usually talking about something that resembles a drive. So we're more of like a full swing. So the ball's bounced, we set up, and we have a larger swing, and usually it's sort of like a longer follow through. And we're usually doing it because we're trying to drive the ball with more speed and usually trying to hit the ball low with more speed. So when we're hitting ground strokes, it's so different from, say, a dink or a drop, where on a dink and a drop, we want to have really good balance and we want to have great positioning in terms of our reception skills, just like a ground stroke. But the feeling and the paddle work on a dink or a drop, or even on most volleys, it's very compact and there's not as much motion. So your body's usually sort of fairly balanced, and you're just sort of having like a soft lifting feel or a pushing feel, or maybe even just like a compact block feel if we're talking about a block volley. So a ground stroke is very different from that. It usually involves, coiling your shoulders, taking your paddle back a little farther, and then, uncoiling your body with a larger swing and sort of like a larger swing path and a longer swing path. So ground strokes for people who don't come from like a squash background or a tennis background or even ping pong, um, like there's a lot more coordination required to hit a ground stroke and hit it well. Because again, anyone can hit a pickleball fast or hard because the paddle's light. It's easy to swing really fast. Anyone can do that. But swinging with like speed and controlling what the paddle's doing so that you can control the ball, that's really challenging for a lot of people that are newer to the sport or don't have a rackets background. So on ground strokes, the main challenge is like increasing speed when you're trying to drive the ball more while still maintaining good coordination and good control over what's happening to the paddle at contact so that you can control the flight of the ball.
Yeah, so from what you're saying, literally the ground strokes will use almost all the muscles we will use in other strokes, right? And in the larger or more intensive scale.
That's it. Yeah, like exactly. On a ground stroke, almost your whole body is involved at some point throughout the stroke. Whereas again, if you compare it to say a volley where you're already at the non-volley zone and you're sort of facing the net, sometimes it's more just like maybe a little bit of your shoulder, tricep, forearm, you're just kind of using your hand really to block the ball or do something with the ball. And on a ground stroke, yeah, all your body parts are engaged throughout the stroke. And usually it sort of starts with preparing the body with an athletic stance. So you're sort of sitting down on your feet or sitting down on your legs a little more. You've usually turned your shoulders in preparation for the shot. Sometimes we call that a unit turn. So you're preparing your body and paddle together as a unit. And then you unwind by either stepping forward and rotating your hips a little bit to generate the momentum of the swing. So there's more of the body is engaged during a ground stroke.
Yeah, so with that, what would you suggest? Like before we hitting the ground stroke or work on practicing on it, how should we warm up our muscles before we jump into so intensive all the muscle engagement?
Yeah, well, if you want to improve your ground strokes and you're sort of new to the biomechanics and the swing of a ground stroke because maybe you don't have a rackets background, you can do a lot of shadow swings. So shadow swings just to get the feel of how the body works. So sort of that idea of the ground up biomechanics or the ground up coordination. So sort of starting where you feel like your legs are initiating the stroke by, it could be stepping forward or it could be more rotational through your hips. But the idea of using your legs first and using your trunk and then your shoulders and arm, and you can do a lot of shadow swings. The key is if you're doing shadow swings without a ball, you have to make sure you're doing it well. And again, doing these the movements in the right sequence. So starting from the ground up where the arm and the paddle are the last thing to come through the stroke. Because if you're doing shadow swings with a lot of repetition, but you're doing it the wrong way, it could lead to inefficient technique, which could lead to injury. But doing shadow swings without a ball is a great way to practice your biomechanics or your ground stroke technique because you don't have to worry about the stimulus or the oncoming ball and timing the shot. So you can just get a feel without the ball. So you can add that to your physical warm up, or you can just do it specifically on its own. And then it's a good idea to just get out there and practice ground strokes with a friend. So you could have yourself and a friend at the baseline. So both players are at the baseline. That gives you lots of time because the ball's coming from the full length of the court. So you could just work on hitting ground strokes at a medium speed. Then you could progress to returning serve with a ground stroke or having your partner at the net. But doing shadow swings, having someone feed balls to you, or doing it with a partner cooperatively, if you have the ability to control the ball, you can do it cooperatively. But ground strokes, they're a critical part of the game, right? So you hit a ground stroke on a return of serve. The serve technique is a ground stroke. It's like you're usually hitting the ball out of the air. and third shot drives. If you want to employ a third shot drive, ground strokes are really important. And in today's game where it's getting a little faster and there's some benefit to these powerful paddles now, having good ground strokes can really up the level of your game and help you improve your ability to neutralize or take advantage of your opponent's weaknesses. So yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, very long answer there, but
No,
hopefully
no, that's
helpful.
great. Because then leads to the next stroke, which is the serve.
Mm.
Of course, we all know how important the serve is. So, yeah, can you talk about the mechanics breakdown of the serve?
Yeah, so yeah, on the serve, the great thing about the serve is you get to control, you're in control of the ball before you do it. So you can control the rhythm and timing. So it's a little easier to have really efficient technique. And I just wanted to mention too, when we're talking about technique, like good technique is efficient and it's effective, right? So effective just means you can make the ball do what you want it to do. So if you have good technique, it should lead to implementing, or it should lead to you being able to implement the tactic that you're trying to implement and doing it with effectiveness. But good technique is also, it's efficient. So if you have good technique, we call it efficient technique, which means you can sort of maximize power with the least amount of effort, but also it's safe. So when we talk about efficient technique, it means there's a low chance of injury, even if you repeat that technique over and over. So the good thing about the serve is it's a little more easy to be efficient because we get to throw the ball up and put it exactly where we want before we hit it. So when we're serving, I mean, there's a few things that are really important. Like if we're talking about having good technique or good biomechanics on the serve, it's just like a ground stroke. So we generally want to start by the motion starts from the ground up. So we usually have sort of what we call a ground force reaction, not to get too technical, but like we push into the ground with our legs from an athletic stance. Usually we're standing sideways. For most people, standing sideways or preparing the body sideways to the ball is how we start. And we usually want to have a little bit of like a slightly wide stance so we have good balance and a bit of an athletic feeling where we're sort of sitting down on our legs just a little bit because that sitting feeling is going to allow us to push into the ground. And it's that push that'll allow us to sort of drive our body forward and also rotate our hips. And our hips then sort of rotate our shoulders, and our shoulders bring our arm and paddle through to the ball. So when we're talking about the serve, we're really using the lower body a lot at the beginning of the stroke to help drive sort of the core and the upper body, which bring the arm and the paddle towards the ball. So we want that ground up feeling. So just that idea of like feeling the ground under your legs and feet when you initiate the serve stroke. The other thing I want to mention that's really important is it's really hard to have good technique if you don't have some other fundamentals in place. So for instance, on the serve, we want to make contact out in front of our body at a comfortable distance from our body. So as an example, if we have an impact point that's too much beside us, which we call a late impact point, it'll be really hard to sort of rotate our hips or stride into the serve and develop some linear momentum because our contact point will be beside us and it'll make us jammed where we won't be able to rotate our body or be efficient with the use of our body. And then we have to overuse our shoulder and our forearm because of that late contact point. So it's important if we want to be efficient and have good coordination, we have to have our impact point slightly in front of our body and at a distance that allows our arm to be pretty long and loose. Because if the ball's too far away or too close, we'll have to it'll prevent us from using our body efficiently. And we usually have to overuse our hand or our arm, which if we do enough times can lead to injury because we have to really use that segment of our body actively where we want to be using these body parts in the right sequence so that they can sort of seamlessly coordinate and have more of a flow where it's we call it like a summation of force. So all these forces are working in the right sequence. And in some, we don't have to work too hard. And there's not a lot of like resistance during the stroke. So it ends up being really smooth and equals, a sort of an effortless stroke, which makes it fairly easy to get what we call like effortless speed on the ball.
Yeah.
Again, I hope that wasn't too complicated, but it's just important to understand that it's a ground up feeling. And it's also important to have your impact point at the right height, the right distance, and out in front of your body to allow yourself to swing fluidly.
Yeah. I think you made a very great point. It's like effortless stroke is actually coming from more work from your legs. It's all ground up.
Yeah, your arm, like the arm is, it should be like somewhat passive in the sense that it's really should be your legs and your trunk that help rotate your body and bring and develop some momentum where it carries the arm forward. And it's almost like you're throwing your arm through the ball with the paddle. So it's like it's really the lower body that does a lot of the work at the beginning. And as long as you're fairly relaxed, it's a little bit more of like a throwing feeling, which might be hard at the beginning for people who are newer to the sport. But that idea of just sort of using your body to move the arm instead of just using, or your body to help move the arm and paddle instead of just using your arm, which again, if we only use our arm without using our trunk or our legs, this sort of part of your shoulder, the front part of your shoulder, which people the rotator cuff, it can lead to overuse injury because it's too active during the shot, so it gets tight and then it gets restricted. And if we do that over and over again, it can lead to a repetitive use injury. It's also probably can lead to some other issues with how you send the ball, so it might not also be effective as well.
Yeah. So here's the trivia for you. And do you know what's the number one injury among all the pickleball players?
I don't. I'll take a guess. You clearly do. Well, if you talk to physios and
Yeah.
doctors, they often are talking a lot about like Achilles injuries, Achilles
Yeah.
tendon tears and calf injuries, but also I think there's quite a bit of shoulder and like tennis elbow type injuries as well.
Yeah. It's actually, yeah, I was having the same conversation with Andrew, and he gets the same Achilles. I said to him, I said, no, when you come to the Achilles injury and pain, you're a more advanced player. So the number one pain and injury, like in quantity, is actually the forearm. The pickleball, we used to call tennis elbow, but now way more people have the pickleball elbow than tennis
Yeah.
elbow. And also we see more new players coming to the sport. The first injury often, like now it listed at the number one, is the pickleball elbow. It's exactly the reason you just explained, because people are just using the arm, overstretching, and not using the right muscle group, and not using their lower body.
Exactly. So I see the same things you see. So sometimes I'll be at the club where I play or I'll be coaching and I see so many players on their ground strokes and serve overusing their arm without the use of their body. So again, it's using the lower body to initiate the serve or the ground stroke so that your arm actually doesn't have to do as much work. So the less you use your legs and your hips and your trunk, the more you have to use your arm. But it's that use of the arm that leads to an overuse injury because your forearm muscles and the tendons around your elbow and even your bicep muscles, they can get tight and aggravated from overuse of the arm. And I see that all the time. In fact, I see players, again, when we talk about having good technique or being able to utilize efficient and effective technique, the impact point and your setup or reception skills are so important because if your impact point is beside you or it's late, you can't use your body in the right sequence. So you end up having to compensate by accelerating through the arm and using your arm, forearm, and wrist a little bit more or a lot more. And it's interesting. A lot of the players I see wearing elbow braces, if you watch them hitting ground strokes, often their impact point is beside them and they overuse their forearm and their arm. And you can see why they're wearing those elbow braces because they're doing this over and over again. So that's an example of inefficient technique. And if they could move their impact point further in front and use their lower body a little bit more to execute the stroke, their arm could relax and be a little bit more smooth and fluid through the shot, and it would lead to less injury. The challenge is if you're new to the sport, all using your lower body and having like fluid technique and good coordination, it requires coordination. And having great coordination is tough if you don't come from another sport or an athletic background. So that's the challenge. But yeah, those are common things that I see all the time. And but that's why it's important to get off to a good start when you're new to the sport is, take a lesson with your local club professional or local instructors so that you can learn proper fundamentals, not only to play better, but also to hopefully be less prone to injury.
Yes, exactly. And that is also coming from my personal experience. That was the first injury I have, and it's pickleball elbow. And I think most of us comes through that stage. And all the listeners out there and listen to this podcast, and if you're suffering from pickleball elbow, maybe you should think about your feet, your lower body muscle engagement. It's not necessarily you're overplaying, but you're not practicing playing the right way, right?
That's it. Yeah, it's often a combination of both. It could be that sometimes it's repetitive strain. You might have great technique, but if you just train a lot, eventually it's going to catch up with you, and it's going to lead to injury, especially if you don't have proper warm up or cool down and recovery habits. But a lot of injuries, a lot of them are overuse injuries, and they're overuse they're injuries, not just because of the overuse, but because of some key things that are happening or not happening in terms of fundamentals that would make the stroke or the shot more fluid or more efficient. So yeah, it's important to get off to a good start when you're new to the sport by, maybe getting out there and doing some lessons with your local instructor or coach so that you can do things sort of with good fundamentals and do them in a safe way that will give you some longevity in the sport.
Yes, that's what we all want. We want to play longer.
Exactly.
And more fun, longer time.
I mean, yeah, just to add to that, one of the things like I did get injured a lot with calf injuries, mostly at the beginning of my pickleball journey. And it was because I wasn't warming up properly, and I took for granted how well I needed to warm up. But because I love this sport, it's like everyone else who plays pickleball, we love this sport so much. And it's a big part of most of our lives. So it's important to have all these good habits, good fundamentals, but also like proper warm-ups, proper stretching and cool down routines so that you can increase your longevity and hopefully be a part of this pickleball community for as long as possible.
Yeah, thank you. So we talked about the serve, and I think the next stroke we want to talk about is the return of the serve. Is that similar to the serve?
Yeah.
The mechanics.
Yeah, the return of serve, it's a ground stroke because the ball's bouncing. And generally, you're assuming you've set up and received the ball well, so you've prepared for the oncoming ball well. The way you hit a return is often very similar to the way you would hit any other ground stroke or like a third shot drive. The challenge with this return of serve is that if you're playing someone who's good at serving, the ball's often coming really fast and deep, so it challenges your ability to be in good position. So again, we talked about reception skills in a previous episode and the ability to read and react. We had talked about that during the stroke movement cycle in the previous episode. So our ability to have good biomechanics or good technique or efficient technique and good coordination is really heavily influenced by reception skills and our ability to read and react to the oncoming ball. And if we don't read or react to the oncoming ball very well, we'll be either late or in a less than ideal position that forces us to use, just our forearm and our hand to adapt because we're not in the best position. And again, that can lead to bad shots, but also can lead to injury if we do it enough times like that. Because in an ideal world, we're set up in a good position to have a good impact point, and we're set up on time, which is before the ball bounces. And if we do that, we can then utilize those ground up sort of mechanics and have good coordination from the ground up to make an efficient stroke on the ball, which will lead to a good shot and and also like a smooth fluid motion that minimizes the chance of injury.
Yeah. So with I find the return of serve is actually more challenging than the serve. Like as you said, they're all ground strokes, but with the serve, you have enough time. You control the rhythm. You know when you want to serve. You have enough time to prep. With return of the serve, it's almost like you stay quiet. You're watching the ball coming, especially if it's a hard serve coming towards you. Suddenly, your body needs to fire up. Like, sorry, I shouldn't say body, the muscle, right? Like, and from 0 to more engaged and uh, like be prepared to return, maybe only for like less than half second, and it has a lot of toll on the muscles.
It does, yeah, because if you want to hit good returns, as you said, you have to be ready to quickly read and react to the serve that's coming towards you. And if you want to be good at that, you generally need to have a good athletic stance. So like a reasonably wide base with your feet a little wider than your shoulders, and you're sitting down and you're a little bit on the balls of your feet because you're hopefully, if you're doing that, you're doing it so that you can move laterally from side to side quickly, or you might even need to move forward or backwards a little bit really quickly. And that requires a really good athletic stance, which means your calves, your hamstrings, your quads, your glutes, and your core are all sort of activated, and they're ready to be used. And often, again, that serve's coming fast, and it might be coming fast away from your body, and you have to move quickly to get in position. So yeah, like this, the return of serve can be a really physical shot in terms of the movement to get set for the ball and then the actual execution of the shot itself. So, which is again why it's important to have great warm-ups and also to train it, but also to do some physical development if you can off the court. It's important to do some physical conditioning so that your body is prepared for the challenges that this sport presents. And the return to serve is one of those areas where it can really benefit you.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I cannot believe how fast we're running out of the time. And we're only talking about 3 strokes. And I love it. I love how in-depth you're going to. And I think we will continue this topic in the next episode. We have more strokes to cover. And thank you so much, Jeff, for coming to the podcast today. And I'm looking forward to so to continue to talk about more strokes and thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Lily. Look forward to talking about the other shots.
Yeah, thank you. And talk to you soon.